In my previous video, I outlined the idea of microblogging, and I'll put a link to the previous video in this one just above. In this one, I'm going to outline some of the improvements I've made to the software and also some new features that I've added. So let's start with the first new thing. Seems quite minor, but actually it's quite useful. When I start the server and when the server's running, it produces log messages. Now, I didn't have them timestamped, and I've added the timestamps now to the log messages so that you can refer back to them in a better way. So that's the first thing. Now, if we switch over to the client machine, let's have a look at some of the commands that we can now use. The first one is MB list without any parameters. So we have to direct the message and then use MB list. Let's see what that does for us. Now, in each of these cases, I'm going to speed up the reception because you don't need to sit here and watch it slowly transferring the the information over. If we just quickly flick over now to the server machine and just look at the log messages, you can see that it's received the list command and it's now going to send that listing back. Now, something I should point out here is I've created 10 blogs, 10 posts in the blog, 20 through 29. Now, if you look, it's only transferring the first 5. And what I've done is I've added a limit in the code so that if you try and list, say, 1,000 blog entries, it will only list 5 at a time. And it's in the script. It's just, in fact, I can show it to you here as we're in this machine. It's just a very simple parameter list limit here. And so we can just change that limit if we want to change it to list more or list fewer. Now, unfortunately, it looks as though we've missed a frame or two in this one, which is really annoying as I'm doing the demonstration, but you can see that blog 20 doesn't have all of the information. But let's let this complete and then we'll jump back in. Now, I want you to notice here that it's already started to corrupt the output, and this is where we have this problem, I think, with new line characters. But this is what I've now found is if you let it play right to the end, you can see that it reforms the whole message and with a timestamp and a frequency, and then outputs that in the sort of correct format list. And it seems that that's working all the time now. The only additional change I've made to the code that might affect this, and in fact I think it does affect it, is if you have 2 new line characters one after the other, that seems to really upset it. But what I've done is wherever I detect 2 new line characters, I inject a space between them, and that seems to have stopped the problem in that eventually you do get the correctly formatted message, even though during the reception it goes a bit balmy, and actually over here on the left you'll find that it'll do some pretty crazy things over here in this messages dialog box over here. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So imagine now that I've got up to 24 and I want to see if I've got any past 24. So let's do MB list greater than 24. Now, of course, I've made a mistake there because I haven't directed it. In fact, let's just make sure they all get directed. Let's do that again. MB list greater than 24. Okay, so that one's completed, but you can see this time we've lost probably 2 frames there. The remainder of the explanation for post 25 and its new line character, and then the 0 off of 026. Anyway, you get the idea. Let's try something else. Now let's try and see if there are any listings later than 2023 2023-01 25th, so the 25th of January. So this is again a new capability to list based on a date criteria. Now, though the list command supports the date criteria, the get command does not, because you can have multiple entries on the same date, just like you've got here, 28 and 29. So you still have to use the reference number in the when you're using the get command. Okay, and now let's use the get command. We'll get log 28. And the final thing I wanted to show you was some of the improvements in error messages. So for example, if I try and get an entry by date, which is something I said that wasn't supported. Okay, we seem to have missed all the frames that had the actual information in it. So this is obviously going to be a problem when you think about it over the quality of the link. When you're sending such long messages, it does raise that question. And so one of the things I did think about was you could have an error detection and correction mechanism. It would be quite easy to put it in, but it would mean that you'd have to write a client-side piece. You wouldn't just be able to type in the commands as I'm doing here. So I'm having thoughts about the client-side piece, but actually, as this is, there we go. Get by date is unsupported. So the next thing I'm going to do actually is make this code available. So in my next video, I'll explain how you can grab a copy of the code. It's really simple to run. It's a single Python file. You just have to type in a command and it will run and start. So it's very simple. It works with all the default settings for JS8Call. There's a couple of changes you have to make in JS8Call, but it's very minor. So I'll put some README notes in with the file once I've figured out how I'm going to distribute it. Okay, so I hope you found that interesting. Seem to be making progress with it, and I look forward to talking to you about it again soon.